Hey traders, it's John Fortune here with this week's weekly Forex Forecast. I hope you're having a great weekend. We're going to run through 20 markets in today's video and we're going to kick off with the DXY as we always do. In last week's video I noted that the DXY was currently structured to the upside and was looking for a pullback towards the 92.64. We came back and actually tested this level right at the end of the week. We had a sell-off, we corrected sideways, and then we had another sell-off on the Powell speech out of Jackson Hole on Friday, where he basically said he didn't want to taper too soon because if inflation was going to be transitory, he didn't want to cause a problem where there might not be one. And the market took this as being fairly dovish, especially compared to other FOMC members in terms of when tapering will come. Now, despite this sell-off and the fact that the initial sell-off was quite steep, you have to take this into context with the DXY overall, which is that it has been getting more volatile. And if we take a step back and look at the price action last week, we didn't break the previous low. The structure in the near term is still to the upside, and this was actually only an inside week. So overall, although the sell-off looked quite steep, it was a neutral week for the DXY. So going into next week, I am still bullish on the DXY. We have not in any meaningful or significant way crossed the line in the sand here at the 92.64. And going into next week, this would be a great place to start to look for bullish reversals, which we do not have just yet, but any bullish reversal in this area will be viewed as an opportunity to look for further advances in the DXY up towards the 93.76, which is the same target we looked at last week. Now, something important to note here is that in the much bigger picture, if we zoom out, it does look like we could be coming towards the end of an ABC correction in the dollar, and there may be further downside in the dollar over the next 3 months or so. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, how does this tie in with a bullish bias going into next week? Well, we have not yet reversed in the near term. How will we know if this is an ABC and we're going to start to look to the short side? We would want to see a reversal in the near term picture, what we're looking at here. So what might that look like? Well, if we start to come down next week and we take out this low, what we're going to be forming then is the potential for a developing head and shoulders pattern, a near-term correction, failure to make a high over here, and that would kickstart the potential ABC reversal in the DXY. As it currently stands, it does look like we have one more move to the upside, and that is what I'd be primarily focused on next week. So I do go into next week with a bullish bias on the dollar, but just be aware of that overall ABC potentially developing and further declines in the dollar in the near future, if not next week. Next is EurUsd. Now, last week in Eurodollar, I highlighted the 1.17890 to look for a pullback towards this level. We did pull back and we didn't really have any bearish reversals in this market, despite the fact we rallied to the upside last week off of the Powell speech. I do still think there is a good chance we get that rally to the upside in the dollar one last time, even if we are going to roll over in the bigger picture. And as a result, I am still favoring short positions in Eurodollar next week. We have started to break above this level, so what I would like to see is the market come back down below here. We may, for example, start to come down, break these lows over here. Any pullback in that area, especially if we start to flag, would be viewed as the opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1.1651. Now, if you're looking for those bearish reversals next week, what that's also going to do is it's going to filter out any short positions in this market if it just keeps trading to the upside. So I do want to see those bearish reversals first. A nice reversal and then a bear flag would be preferable in Eurodollar going into next week. Next is Aussie dollar. Now, last week I was looking for a pullback in Aussie dollar for a move down to the 0.70960. We had a big move to the upside, and again, very easy to think because of the volatility that this was a very bullish week. But when you take it in context with the rest of the volatility of this market, you can see this was another inside week. It's actually a neutral week overall in terms of the trend to the downside in Aussie dollar. So going into next week, we have not crossed the line in the sand of 0.7355. So any pullback, including everything we had last week, is still only viewed as an opportunity to short this at a better price. I wouldn't short it right here, simply because I prefer to look for bearish reversals, and this is quite bullish as it currently stands. But going into next week, any reversal in this market, if we start to come back down and break lows over here, any pullback and any bear flag in this market will be viewed as an opportunity to start to look for bearish positions down to next key of support to the downside and the target set, 0.7096. Next is New Zealand dollar. Now last week we had a big rally to the upside, but again, if you take this into context of the overall trend and the volatility that we've been seeing, this was another inside week. Inside week is a neutral week in New Zealand dollar, just as it was in the DXY Aussie dollar as well. So unless or until we cross the line in the sand here in any significant way in the 0.70350, I do still only favor short setups in this market. We have a big rally to the upside off of the Powell speech last Friday. However, if that starts to fade and we get traders coming in fading this to the downside and we start to break lower, any bearish setup, any break lower, head and shoulders or a bear flag in this market will be viewed next week as an opportunity to look for bearish entries. Down to the next NzdChf support to the downside and the target set at the 0.6802. Next is pound dollar. Now last week we started to move to the upside and we had a bit of a correction here in the 4-hour chart, and at this point probably no need to tell you what this was. This was another inside week, another neutral week. So going into next week, I do still favor bearish setups in pound dollar. We're not even close in my estimations to being bullish on this or for this to be a buy opportunity in pound dollar. We would need to see a much higher reversal, not just in pound dollar, but also we need to see the DXY rolling over as well. So going into next week, any pullback in this market is still viewed only as a correction and an opportunity to start to look for bearish setups. Down to the next NzdChf support to the downside and the target set at the 1.3572. Crude oil, and last week with the sell-off in the DXY, we did start to see profit taking coming into crude oil. We started to see a snap back to the upside. We're currently sitting at the line in the sand highlighted last week. We're looking for a pullback towards this area. And if we look at how the market is trading into this key area of resistance, because that's what the line in the sand is, a key area of resistance or support, where if the market crosses that, this could signal a reversal in the market itself or the asset itself. Well, we haven't crossed it. We're right at this level. This is where the market could sell off. And if we look at the price action coming into this, we're trading into this really with slowing momentum if we look at previous highs over here. So this is now an area we could start to see crude oil rolling over to the downside, and any break lower in this market, any bearish reversals will be viewed as an opportunity to look for short positions. Down to the next NzdChf support to the downside and the target set at the 61.39. Any weaker oil, any rollover to the downside in this market will also have a negative effect on the Canadian dollar. And I do favor, once again, CAD shorts and CAD weakness going into next week because of this. Next is US dollar CAD. Now with the DXY still structured to the upside and looking like it might have one more rally to the upside, even if it is going to roll over on that bigger ABC, it hasn't rolled over just yet, and crude oil trading into that key of resistance that we looked at with a lack of momentum, looking like it's going to roll over to the downside next week. I do still favor long positions in this market. And although we had a big sell-off, this is a steep sell-off, the market got very volatile. Reflecting the DXY, once again, it was an inside week. It was a neutral week. So very simply put, going into next week, my long bias does still remain in this market, and any continued pullback is simply viewed as another opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 1.2811. Next is CAD franc. Now CAD franc might be my favorite pair going into next week. It's at least one of my favorite markets going into next week. I do think we see further declines in this market next week. Last week I was looking for a pullback away from the 0.7061 towards the 0.73610, and we got a really nice pullback in this market. This move to the upside in CAD franc was, wait for it, an inside week. Again, across the board, we had inside weeks. Last week across the markets, in the currency markets anyway, was a very neutral week. And as a result, I'm still looking for further declines in this market. Nothing has really changed here. So going into this week, you can see we've already started to break lower. This is showing weakness already coming in. We have this head and shoulders pattern in CAD franc. This is therefore a great place to start to look for bearish entry. So any continued pullback in this market will be viewed as another opportunity to look for short positions. Down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 0.7061. Next is CAD yen. Now CAD yen is another market that I like going into next week. CAD franc is my favorite, but CAD yen is probably in the top 4, top 5. And this is because last week we're looking for a pullback. We had a really nice pullback. Deep pullback gives us nice opportunities to short this. We've already started to develop a head and shoulders pattern here, and especially if we start to roll over from key resistance in crude oil, which we looked at earlier in the video, this is going to help CAD yen to the downside. So pretty much from where we are, any continued pullback, this is looking like a great opportunity to short this market. What I would like to see is, even though we start to develop head and shoulders, any break lower once again next week is going to be viewed as the opportunity to look for bearish setups down to the next key support to the downside at the 84.72. Next is Aussie yen. Now, in previous weekly Forex forecast videos, we were looking for short positions up in this area before this big sell-off, not just in Aussie yen, in fact, in a number of these markets. And we had the big sell-off, and last week we corrected to the upside, very similar to what we've looked at in the other markets. We had this correction. It was an inside week. It was actually a neutral week despite the volatile nature of this pullback. And very simply put, going into next week, I do still favor short positions in this market. Any bearish reversal to the downside in this market will be viewed as an opportunity to look for short positions. We're going to be looking down towards the next key support to the downside and the target set at the 77.57. Next is New Zealand yen. Now, last week we had a nice snapback in this market because of the volatility of the sell-off the week before. And this is another inside week. It's a neutral week in New Zealand yen. I am still favoring short positions. We have not crossed the 77.510 in any significant way here, which would be where I'd start to look for potential reversals to the upside in this market and where I would start to consider bullish setups in this market. We have not broken this level, and so very simply put, although we're sitting right at the top here, any break to the downside, any bearish reversal next week in this market will be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish setups down to the next key support to the downside and the target set at the 74.59. Next is Aussie franc. Now, this is my second favorite market going into next week after CAD franc. We are pulling back, and again, another inside week, neutral week. I am still looking for short positions in this market, short setups, and we're starting to lack momentum. As you can see, it looks like we're forming a potential double top here. So any bearish reversal in this market, especially if we were to come and break this low, confirming this double top, this is going to be a great opportunity to start to look for short positions in Aussie franc down to the next key support to the downside and the target set at the 0.6507. Next is New Zealand franc. Now, we had a really nice sell-off to the downside in New Zealand franc, and again last week we had some short covering, profit taking coming in, saw this volatile snapback. But just another inside week, a neutral week. I am still bearish on this market, and in fact, as we always say, the deeper the pullback, the better, because it provides us with better risk to reward to the downside. So any bearish reversal in this market going into next week is going to be viewed as an opportunity to start to look for short positions down to the next key support to the downside and the target set at the 0.6233. Now, just bear in mind that a lot of these markets are showing similar setups, so you're not going to want to trade every single setup you see. The best thing to do is pick the best ones, look for the best setups, best bearish reversal patterns that appear, and you can trade those ones instead. But just to reiterate, we're not looking to trade every single market next week. You don't want to overtrade or take too much risk. Moving on to stocks and starting with the SPX, we took out the target last week of the 4485.83, and this was the target that we had set in previous weekly Forex forecast videos, so we finally got there. In last week's video, I did highlight the fact that with Jackson Hole and also with the deflationary move we saw in currencies, there were some warning signs flashing for the stock market. And although we came down and we took out the previous low over here and we started to enter into this potential developing head and shoulders, I did stress that this was not yet bearish. We would need to see the market coming down, breaking below the line in the sand, taking out this low. That would be what could potentially kickstart a reversal. Instead, we formed a higher high in the market, which is exactly what we'd want to see to become bullish once again. So very simply put, going into this week, I am bullish on stocks once again after clearing new highs last week. Any pullback in this market will be viewed simply as an opportunity to start to look for further advances up to the next target set at 4526.97, and if we can break through here, the next target to the upside is 4598.55. Next is the Nasdaq. Now, very similar to the SPX, the line in the sand here at the 14791.89 held last week. We did not break down below this, which was highlighted as a potential reversal in stocks if we came down and broke below this level. We bounced to the upside, we made new highs, and this is painting a bullish outlook going into next week. We did take out both targets set in the Nasdaq, finally finishing the week at the 15,378.31 target. Going into this week, I do favor long positions in the Nasdaq, and I think we're going to see higher highs once again in this market. We broke out of this range last week, and any pullback towards this range next week is simply viewed as an opportunity once again to look for further advances in this market up towards the next target to the upside at the 15,796.91. Next is the Dow Jones. Now, the Dow Jones actually failed to make a new high last week, unlike the Nasdaq and the SPX. So the risk of a reversal remains in the Dow Jones compared to the other markets we looked at. You can see we have a developing head and shoulders, and we failed over here to make a new high. And if we were to come and break this level here, this could trigger some strong liquidation in the Dow Jones. So again, something to think about going into next week. However, this is not yet bearish, and with new highs in the SPX and also the Nasdaq last week, I do favor further advances going into next week in the Dow Jones. So any pullback towards the 34,764.82 is simply viewed as another opportunity to look for bullish reversals in this market up towards the next target to the upside at the 36,066.23. And finally for stocks, we're going to look at the Nifty. Now last week, unlike US stocks, I did note that we simply had a bull flag set up in the Nifty. We came back towards the previous highs and was looking for a rally into the 16,904.20. We did have a nice rally towards this target, so for anybody not involved from last week, any pullback once again is simply viewed as another opportunity to look for bullish reversals into the next target to the upside set from last week at the 16,904.20. Next is gold. Now gold is a very interesting chart going into next week because after the flash crash going into next week now, I am bullish on gold. We are structurally bullish on this market in the near term. However, the DXY has not yet rolled over to the downside, and this leaves an interesting scenario because we looked earlier on in the video at the DXY potentially being towards the end of a larger ABC, which would be bearish for the DXY. Well, if the DXY does roll over next week for whatever reason, and again, I'm looking for at least one more move up in the DXY, I am bullish on the DXY going into next week. But if we do get a bearish reversal to the downside in the DXY, this would propel gold through the 1834.12, and this would actually be a major double bottom reversal in gold in the bigger picture. This would be the confirmation point. So it is very interesting. Although I still have a bullish bias on the DXY next week, gold may be giving us an indication, an early slight lead on where the DXY is going to be headed maybe in the next 4 weeks or so. So as it currently stands, because I'm bullish on the DXY going into next week, I'm not going to trade gold, because trading gold to the upside while I'm bullish on the DXY, it can happen, but any moves to the upside are likely to be capped if the DXY remains strong next week. But in terms of gold, the next move I'd be looking for is any pullback towards the 1782. Be looking for a move up towards the 1834.12. And as I said, if we do break this level, this would be a major double bottom reversal in the bigger picture in gold. So definitely a market to keep an eye on next week, but personally I will probably leave gold and not trade it next week. I'd like to see the DXY rolling over first before I take bullish positions or setups in gold. Next is silver. Similar to gold, we reversed the upside last week. This market is structurally technically bullish. We had an inverse head and shoulders in this market, and we broke the confirmation level right at the end of the week to kickstart potentially a bull market to the upside in this asset. Having said that, there are a few things to consider. One, although we broke above the confirmation point, this is still very choppy. Two, we're very close to the target. And three, the DXY has not yet rolled over to the downside. So there are, in my opinion, some risks to any bullish setups or positions in silver going into next week whilst the dollar is still strong. So with that said, if you are looking perhaps to jump in front of a potential DXY reversal, if you think that's what's going to happen, any pullback in this market would be viewed as the opportunity to look for bullish setups into the 22.60. Personally speaking, I will leave silver next week. Even if it breaks a bit higher, I would prefer to look for bullish setups in silver once we get, and if we get, a bearish reversal to the downside in the DXY that we looked at the beginning of the video. And last but of course never least, we have Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin has been a really great performing asset in the weekly Forex forecast since we introduced it. And last week, I was looking for a pullback in this market towards the 44,388.97. We did have a really nice pullback, and as it currently stands, this is simply just a bull flag in this market. Any continued correction is once again going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals into the next key of resistance to the upside in the target set with a 52.911. So that is it from me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please let me know by liking, sharing and subscribing. A big thank you to everybody who does that on a regular basis, and a big thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the channel so far. I want to wish you all a fantastic weekend, and I want to wish you all the best in your trading next week. The only thing left to say is take care and don't forget to trade safely.